Welcome back to Revenge with Mireya. I'm Mireya, and today's story is about a woman they called Mousy and manageable, until she heard her husband and her pastor laughing about her in the church baptismal room. Big mistake. What happens next? A 23-year invisible woman becomes a destroyer of kingdoms. This is the shepherd's reckoning. Let's dive in. The collection plate passed through my trembling hands for the last time that Sunday morning. 23 years I'd counted every dollar, every crumpled bill that passed through Meridian Heights Community Church, and Pastor Stellara Quillen never once questioned where a single cent went. That was her first mistake. Her second was sleeping with my husband in the baptismal chamber, while I worked double shifts at the diner to keep her precious stained glass windows polished. My name is Marvette Quillen, and I'm about to burn down a kingdom built on lies. The discovery came 3 weeks ago. I'd forgotten my reading glasses in the church office, came back after evening service to find them. The building was dark except for a sliver of light beneath the baptismal preparation room. I heard Braxton's laugh first, the one he used to save for me, back when we were young and stupid and believed in things like sacred vows. Then her voice, smooth and honeyed, the same voice that preached about fidelity every Sunday. "Does Marvette suspect anything?" Stellara asked. "That mousy little thing." Braxton's contempt cut deeper than any blade. "She's too busy being grateful I married her, thinks I'm at Bible study leadership meetings. She actually irons my shirts and thanks me for serving the church." Their laughter echoed off the tile walls. I stood there for 47 minutes listening to them, learning that my marriage had been a joke for 2 years, learning that Stellara had convinced Braxton to pursue me specifically because I was manageable. Her word, someone who wouldn't ask questions about the church finances she was siphoning. I didn't confront them. I walked out of that church and sat in my car for 3 hours, rain hammering the windshield, and I planned. Revenge is a sin, they say, but so is adultery, so is theft, so is destroying a woman's life while hugging her and calling her sister. The church had 700 members, a $1 million building fund, and a pastor who'd convinced everyone she was chosen by God herself. Stellara was untouchable, or so she thought. But every queen has a weakness, and I'd spent 23 years watching, learning, seeing everything from my invisible position as the church accountant nobody noticed. I knew where the bodies were buried, literally and figuratively. Monday morning, I called in sick to the diner for the first time in 11 years. I drove to Henderson County, 3 hours away, and met with Kelridge Thorne, a forensic accountant who'd helped my cousin during her divorce. He had sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for finding what people wanted hidden. I handed him 6 years of church financial records, copies I'd made over the years, stored in my sister's attic beneath boxes of Christmas decorations Braxton never looked at. "I need to know where the money's really going," I said. Kelridge spread the documents across his desk, his expression darkening as he scanned the numbers. "This is a church." "Supposedly." He studied the numbers for a long moment. "Give me a week." I spent that week playing the perfect fool, made Braxton his coffee, ironed his shirts, thanked him for his dedication to church leadership, smiled at Stellara after service and told her how blessed I felt to serve God's house, watched them exchange glances, probably amused by how clueless I remained. At night I barely slept. I catalogued everything I knew. The way Stellara had pushed through the building fund, claiming God told her we needed expansion. The overseas mission trips she took quarterly, always alone, always to countries with lax banking laws. The way she'd brought in her sister, Drusilla Quillen, as children's ministry director, a woman with a sealed record that nobody thought to question. Every thread, every loose end, every secret. I pulled them all into the light of my dining room table while Braxton slept upstairs, dreaming of his next rendezvous. Kelridge called me Friday morning. "You need to sit down for this." I was already sitting in my car outside the diner. "Tell me." "Your pastor has embezzled approximately $1.2 million over 7 years. She's using a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, funneling building fund money through fake contractor invoices. The construction company doesn't exist. She's also taking 30% off the top of missionary donations and redirecting it to a personal account." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "You can prove this." "I can prove all of it. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" What did I want? I wanted Stellara to feel what I felt. That hollowness, that betrayal, that crushing realization that everything you believed was a carefully constructed lie. But going to the police or the church board wouldn't be enough. She'd lawyer up, probably convince half the congregation I was bitter and lying, paint herself as the victim of a jealous woman. No, this needed to be surgical, devastating, complete. I need more time, I told Kelridge. Keep digging, I want to know everything. Where she travels, what she buys, everyone she's connected to, everything. This is going to cost you. I don't care, I'd already withdrawn my life savings. This was my final investment in truth. The next Sunday, Stellara preached about forgiveness. She stood in her $2,000 designer dress and told us about letting go of grudges, about how holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I sat in my usual spot, 5th row center aisle, and smiled, nodded, even said amen when she made a point about trusting in God's justice. After service, I pulled aside Warwick Denton, the church board chairman. Warwick was a lawyer, wealthy, influential, and completely loyal to Stellara, but he was also prideful about the church's reputation. Warwick, I've been thinking, I said carefully. With the building fund so successful, maybe we should have an independent audit, show the community how responsibly we're managing God's resources. His eyes lit up. Marvette, that's brilliant. Transparency builds trust. I'll propose it at the next board meeting. Stellara vetoed the audit idea immediately, called it an insult to God's anointed leadership and a waste of resources that should go to ministry. But the seed was planted. 3 board members started asking questions. Why was Stellara so opposed to transparency? What was she afraid of? I fanned those flames carefully. A comment here, a casual observation there, always couched in concern, never accusation. I'm sure it's nothing, but I noticed this discrepancy. Or maybe I'm misunderstanding, but these numbers don't quite match. Meanwhile, Kelridge kept digging, and what he found made the embezzlement look like petty theft. Stellara wasn't just stealing money. She'd been running a long-term con across 3 states, starting churches, building them up, draining the accounts, and moving on before anyone noticed. Meridian Heights was her 4th operation. She'd served at Grace Fellowship in Tennessee, Abundant Life Church in Kentucky, and River Valley Community in Georgia, all left mysteriously bankrupt after her departure. She'd changed her last name twice. Stellara Corthen was born Sandra Vickers, became Stephanie Morland, and finally reinvented herself as the charismatic pastor we all trusted. The woman I'd served faithfully for 23 years didn't even exist. But Kelridge found something else, something that made my blood run cold and gave me the final weapon I needed. Stellara's sister, Drusilla, the children's ministry director, her sealed record was for child endangerment. She'd been convicted of leaving 3 children unsupervised for days while she partied, resulting in the youngest child being hospitalized. The record was supposed to follow her, supposed to prevent her from working with children. But Stellara had greased the right palms, called in favors, and installed a convicted child endangerer as children's ministry director of a church with 100 kids. I sat in my car reading the report, thinking about little Cressida Vine, the bright 7-year-old who'd been so excited about vacation Bible school last month, about how Drusilla had been left alone with the younger children multiple times. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. I made copies of everything, stored them in 3 different locations, my sister's house, a safety deposit box, and with Kelridge. Then I drafted a letter, 17 pages, detailing every crime, every lie, every theft. I included bank statements, wire transfer records, photographs of Stellara's vacation home in the Hamptons that she claimed belonged to a generous donor, and a full timeline of her 3 previous church schemes. I also included Drusilla's conviction record and a list of every child in our children's ministry, with a highlighted note about safety violations and the lack of proper background checks. The letter went to the church board, the local newspaper, the district attorney's office, and the state denominational headquarters, all delivered on the same Tuesday morning by courier. Then I went to work at the diner like nothing had happened. The calls started by noon. Warwick Denton phoned me directly, his voice shaking. "Marvette, did you send this?" "Send what?" "You know exactly what. These accusations against Pastor Stellara." "Those aren't accusations, Warwick. Those are facts. Bank records don't lie." "Silence, then. The board meets tonight. Emergency session, you need to be there." "I'll be there. Will you do me one favor? Call the State Child Services office. Ask them to review Drusilla Corthen's credentials." The emergency board meeting was chaos. Stellara showed up in her usual confident stride, ready to spin this as persecution, as Satan attacking God's anointed. But Warwick didn't let her speak. He laid out the financial records, page by page, number by number. 3 board members had already verified the Shell Corporation, traced the wire transfers, confirmed the non-existent contractors. Stellara's composure cracked. "Marvette has made a mistake," she started. "These numbers are out of context." "We called the bank," Warwick interrupted. "We called the Cayman Islands Corporation Registry. We called all 3 of your former churches." His voice cracked. "For God's sake, Stellara, your name isn't even Stellara Corthen." The room erupted. Board members shouting, some defending Stellara out of shock, others demanding answers. I sat quietly in the corner, watching my carefully constructed demolition unfold. Then the State Child Services investigator arrived with the police, and the room fell silent. The investigator, a stern woman named Philantha Cross, had a file thick with documentation. She'd been investigating Drusilla for 3 weeks after an anonymous tip, my tip, reported safety violations in the children's ministry. Mrs. Corthen knowingly employed her sister in a position of authority over children despite a documented conviction for child endangerment, Philantha stated. She falsified background check documents and misrepresented her sister's qualifications to the church board. Stellara went pale. "I had no idea about any conviction." "You petitioned to have the records sealed," I said, standing. My voice was steady now, clear. "You wrote a letter to the court in Georgia claiming your sister had been rehabilitated. You vouched for her. You knew exactly what she was capable of, and you put her in charge of our children anyway." The proof was in my hand, copies of Stellara's letter to the court, her signature at the bottom, her sworn statement that Drusilla was reformed and trustworthy. The board meeting dissolved into shouting. Stellara tried to leave, but Warwick blocked the door. "You're not going anywhere." "Actually," I said, "the police are already outside. I called them before the meeting started. They're very interested in talking to both you and Drusilla about financial fraud, document falsification, and child endangerment." Through the window, we could see the flashing lights. Stellara's face twisted with rage. She turned on me and for the first time really looked at me, saw past the invisible woman who'd served her faithfully for 23 years. "You did this, you destroyed everything." "No," I said calmly. "You did, I just made sure people could see what you'd built." The police took Stellara and Drusilla into custody that night. The local news picked up the story by morning. By afternoon it was regional news. By the end of the week it was national. The angle of a woman pastor betraying her congregation made it especially sensational. The church imploded. Members left in droves, some horrified by the revelations, others convinced it was all a misunderstanding. The building fund was frozen pending investigation. Civil lawsuits started piling up from the previous churches Stellara had defrauded. And Braxton, he came home that Tuesday night, walked into our living room where I was sitting in the dark, and knew immediately that I knew. "How long?" he asked. 3 weeks since I heard you in the baptismal room." He had the decency to look ashamed. "Marvette, I..." "Save it, your things are packed. They're in the garage. I want you out tonight." Braxton tried to explain, to justify, to somehow make his betrayal sound reasonable. How he'd never been attracted to me, how Stellara had made him feel alive, how he'd stayed out of obligation. Each word was another nail in a coffin I'd already sealed. "I spoke to a lawyer yesterday," I said. "Filed for divorce. Adultery is fault-based in this state, so you won't be getting much." "You can't prove..." I held up my phone. "I recorded you and Stellara, that night 3 weeks ago and several times since. I've been very thorough." His face went white. "I'm not going to make this difficult, Braxton. Leave quietly, sign the papers, and we never have to see each other again. Fight me, and I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man you are." He left within the hour. The investigation expanded. Kelridge's work was so thorough that federal prosecutors got involved. Stellara had crossed state lines, used wire fraud, evaded taxes. The charges kept multiplying. The DA estimated she'd stolen nearly $4 million across all 4 churches, destroyed countless lives, and enabled her sister to potentially endanger other children at previous locations. Drusilla cut a deal, testified against Stellara, and got 12 years. Stellara's trial became a media sensation. The charismatic female pastor exposed as a conwoman, the church leader who preached empowerment while living in corruption. She fought the charges, hired expensive lawyers with money she'd stolen, proclaimed her innocence even as bank records proved every crime. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Stellara got 45 years in federal prison. She'd be 93 when she got out, if she lived that long. The judge was particularly harsh during sentencing, noting that Stellara had violated the sacred trust between shepherd and flock, and exploited her position as a female leader to prey upon those who believed in her vision of empowered faith. I attended every day of the trial, sat in the back row watching her squirm, watching her carefully constructed persona crumble. On the day of sentencing, as they led her away in shackles, she spotted me in the gallery. Our eyes met. In that moment she finally understood. The invisible woman she'd dismissed, the mousy accountant she'd manipulated, the wife of her lover who was too meek to notice, that woman had systematically dismantled her entire world. I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just watched her disappear through the courthouse doors, probably for the last time. Meridian Heights Community Church never recovered. The building was sold to pay restitution to victims of Stellara's various schemes. Some members started a new congregation elsewhere, determined to salvage something from the wreckage. Others left organized religion entirely, too betrayed to trust again. I understood both reactions. The divorce was finalized 4 months after Stellara's sentencing. Braxton got almost nothing, his adultery was thoroughly documented, and the judge had no sympathy. Last I heard, he'd moved to Arizona, trying to outrun his reputation. I sold the house, too many memories of a life that turned out to be fiction, bought a small cottage an hour outside town, near a lake where nobody knew me or my story. People ask if I feel guilty about what I did, if destroying Stellara and the church weighs on my conscience. The truth is more complicated than yes or no. I feel guilty about the innocent members who lost their church home, who had their faith shaken because they trusted the wrong leader. I feel guilty that I didn't act sooner, that my pride and heartbreak delayed justice and potentially allowed more children to be put at risk. But guilty about exposing Stellara, about making her face consequences for her crimes, about protecting Cressida and countless other children from her sister's negligence, not even a little bit. The diner let me go with a generous severance after everything came out. At 54 years old, I was ready for a different kind of life. I started volunteering at a women's legal aid clinic 2 counties over, helping women navigate financial fraud cases and divorce proceedings. Kelridge recommended me, said I had a gift for understanding how money moves and where people hide it. Turns out 23 years of meticulous accounting in a criminal enterprise taught me valuable skills. I also started writing. Nothing fancy, just my story, about recognizing when you've been invisible and what happens when the invisible woman demands to be seen. About how revenge, when it's really justice in disguise, can sometimes be the most moral choice available. Some pastor somewhere will probably use my story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of vengeance. Let them, they weren't there. They didn't hear their husband laugh about their thick glasses. They didn't watch a predator endanger children. They didn't count stolen money while trusting it was building God's kingdom. They don't get to judge what I went back to the old church site last month. The building's been demolished, replaced by a community center. The parking lot where I used to park, where I sat in my car that rainy night planning Stellara's downfall, is now a children's playground. Someone planted roses where the baptismal room used to be. I stood there for a long time, thinking about transformation, how something rotten can be torn down and replaced with something that actually helps people, how destruction is sometimes necessary for true healing. A young mother was watching her daughter on the swings. She looked up, saw me staring at the playground and smiled. Beautiful, isn't it? My grandmother always said the best gardens grow from the richest soil. Sometimes you have to clear away the weeds first. I laughed, actually laughed, something I hadn't done much since before I heard Braxton in the baptismal room. Your grandmother was a wise woman. She was, kept me grounded, taught me that women are stronger than they think, especially when everyone underestimates them. I helped her watch the children before I left, drove back to my cottage as the sun set over the lake, the radio playing some old song about redemption and second chances. My phone buzzed, Kelridge, forwarding an article about new federal regulations making it harder for churches to hide financial irregularities. Direct result of Stellara's case. Maybe some good came from all that destruction after all. Maybe the weeds really do need to be pulled for the garden to grow. I pulled into my driveway, looked at my small cottage with its view of the water, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but something close. Peace, maybe, or just the absence of betrayal's constant weight. Marvette Quillen had been invisible for 23 years. Then she became very visible for a few months while she burned down a corrupt kingdom. Now she was invisible again, but by choice this time, living quietly, helping women who needed it, growing her own small garden from the ashes of her old life. The collection plate would never pass through my hands again, but I'd counted the cost of justice down to the penny, and unlike Stellara Cawthon, I'd paid in full. Some stories end with forgiveness. This one ends with balance, the scales finally even, the shepherd judged by her own flock, the invisible woman who stopped the wolf. I went inside, poured myself a glass of wine and toasted the empty room. To women who wake up, to justice that looks like revenge, to gardens that grow where temples fall. Tomorrow I'd help another woman navigate her own financial fraud case. Next week I'd finish writing my story. Next month, who knows, maybe I'd even consider letting someone new into my life, someone who saw me as something other than manageable. But tonight I sat on my porch, watched the sunset paint the lake gold and crimson, and let myself feel what I'd earned through careful planning and righteous fury. Victory tastes a lot like peace, and peace after 23 years of being someone's joke tastes like finally coming home.